But the reality is that there are human beings who are alive today who may not have been alive last week thanks to this decision by the court. I told you last week about the great Roe versus Wade decision. I guess it's not called Roe versus Wade, but the decision overturning Roe versus Wade, which restored the ability of states to extend the protection of life to unborn human beings. Of course, the left, led by Joe Biden, is terribly upset about that. You got vicious attacks on the Supreme Court. The revolutionary left, which is guiding much of the political narrative in this country and the big media, is talking about destroying the Supreme Court, talking about destroying the Senate, eliminating the Senate, providing abortions on federal lands, I guess turning federal lands into killing fields for the unborn. This culture of death is screaming. But the good news is the rule of law just marches on. And the states slowly and surely have already protected the lives of the unborn in their jurisdictions or are moving that way quickly. Now, there are various state court fights and things like that that are going to pop up, but the reality is that there are human beings who are alive today who may not have been alive last week thanks to this decision by the court. And it's not because of a court-imposed mandate on the states, it's the court removing itself from its inappropriate mandate that abortion be legal in all the states. So what's going to happen in the long run is that you're going to have fewer abortions in America because most people support some restrictions on abortion. Now, I believe life begins at conception. I think that's a biological fact, and all unborn human beings should be protected under law. And I know some people dispute that. But under the current state of the law, that dispute is going to be resolved democratically in the states. So what's going to happen? Some states are going to say, oh, we need to protect as many unborn lives as possible, and there'll be severe restrictions on the ability to kill unborn human beings. Other states like California, will be funding the killing of unborn human beings throughout the entire 9 months of pregnancy. And mailing out free abortion pills all across the land. Who knows? That you have that far extremist position on behalf of abortion. But no matter how you slice it, we're going to have fewer abortions in the land, and the left is unhappy with that. And that, I think, should tell you something. Now, what Judicial Watch has been doing, and we will continue to do, is to promote the rule of law and expose government misconduct and issues that I think the American people, and we think the American people, should be alerted to in terms of the operations of their government. And as I talked about last week, and I've talked about before, and it's worth repeating again, the harvesting and trafficking of the organs of human beings killed by abortion, paid for with tax dollars. We've exposed that. And we will continue to expose that because, A, it's still being supported by the Biden administration. I don't know if the monies have gone out recently, but they've turned the spigot back on. But I encourage you to go back and look at the materials we've uncovered there. We'll knock your socks off in a horrific way. We have the receipts for body organs, heads, used to create humanized mice with your tax dollars. Imagine seeing a credit card receipt for the organ of a poor unborn human being killed through abortion. That is Roe. Now let's hope it's no more just like Roe is. People are wondering what we can do at the federal level, and the least we can do is ban the use of fetal organs of unborn human beings killed by elective abortions for research. If you want to do that, I'm sure the Chinese communists have no problem with that sort of barbarity. But in America, you would think we would. But there were other good decisions last week. I don't want to get too far afield. We had that Second Amendment ruling that I talked about, which is already making America more free because now you have more liberty to defend yourself under law in many states. There were two key First Amendment decisions, one related to Maine, where Maine was making available to taxpayers or to parents cash from the state to send their children to schools. And they said you could use it for any school you want, as long as it's not a religious school. And the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. You simply can't do that. You can't discriminate against a school in terms of providing a benefit simply because it's religious. So that's a great victory for religious freedom, and will open up opportunities for religious-based organizations to participate more fully in our nation's public and civic life. Glorious days ahead in that regard. And then secondly, there was a big decision in what is called the Coach Kennedy case. Our friends at First Liberty Institute has been litigating that for years. You should go back and look at the ping pong back and forth as it went up to the court and then up to the Supreme Court, back down again and then up again. But in the end, a big victory for religious freedom. Coach Kennedy was a coach who was praying after the football games in the middle of the field. And he would do it quietly at first, and then the students started doing it with him, and then the other teams started doing it with him, and the school board went crazy. They told him he can't do it. They tried to restrict him. So he started doing it again. He essentially, it worked out so that he made sure the kids weren't doing it with him. I mean, we want to tell you how terrible our First Amendment laws have been in terms of the interpretation of so-called separation of church and state, that, you know, a coach couldn't pray with his kids after a football game. That's a whole other matter. So even after he was doing it quietly in the middle of the field by himself, they still came after him. And the court completely rejected the idea that a coach couldn't pray after a football game by himself in the middle of the field. I mean, the idea that the Supreme Court had to step in and remind a school entity, public school entity in this case, that you've got to protect the ability of your employees and Americans to freely exercise their religion. I'm glad it happened, but it's been years and years of the court trying to implement the left's attack on religious freedom. You know, they believe that any school official who says anything religious or does anything religious is an establishment of religion. And obviously that's not the case. And the court said no. There are two aspects to the First Amendment in that regard. Government wasn't supposed to establish a religion, and it wasn't supposed to interfere with the free exercise thereof. And the left would have you believe the two were in tension. It was the exact opposite. They worked together. And that's what the Supreme Court affirmed. So that core First Amendment freedom, the free exercise of religion, is vindicated again and furthered under this court. And then there was this big decision on Remain in Mexico. Unfortunately, Justices Barrett and Kavanaugh sided with Biden's efforts to blow up the rule of law at the border. You know, I read the decision quickly. I didn't read it as closely as I did the other material yet. You know, but it struck me that the Supreme Court got it wrong and essentially endorsed executive vetoes of laws that had been passed into law and that he's supposed to be under by his oath following and obeying. So the good news is that case is not over, in the sense that that dispute is not over, in terms of there's still litigation about the unwillingness of Biden to attend to his oath of office. But I would highlight again that the Supreme Court is not the end-all and be-all in terms of the entities who are supposed to be protecting our liberties and our nation. Congress has a role, obviously the president has a role, and the states have a role. And when Joe Biden isn't doing his job, what can Congress do? They can use the power of the purse to direct and curtail his activities, or if he's violating his oath in an egregious way, they can impeach him. So, you know, just because the Supreme Court blesses something doesn't mean it should pass muster. with those of us concerned about this growing crisis. We had that terrible incident in San Antonio, 52 innocents. Yes, I know they're illegal aliens and all that, but they're innocents. They should not have been, they died in that terrible truck incident in the back of a truck. A direct consequence of the lawlessness on Joe Biden's border. And thousands in record numbers continue to overcome our border. And it's one thing to kind of look the other way, but then the Biden administration is aiding and abetting the smuggling operations. There's a story we highlighted in our Corruption Chronicles blog talking about how they're creating this giant facility in North Carolina for kids to come into. So these kids are being smuggled, and we're helping that smuggling operation get them to another location in the United States. And you can just imagine what's going to go on at that facility. What a nightmare. So the Supreme Court, I think, dropped the ball there, but I'm highlighting the fact that, of course, Judicial Watch is going to expose what's going on and try to stop it where we can. It doesn't mean the ball should be dropped by either the Congress, and I understand the Congress is controlled by allies of the president right now. But I can tell you that if Republicans take over, they're not going to want to do the accountability work that I'm talking about. They have to be pushed. I've worked with this. I've worked with Congress longer than I care to admit to. I think this is now my 24th year at Judicial Watch, right? I think it's, it's my 24th anniversary, July 1st. And sometimes Congress gets good information out, but most of the time they're hapless and feckless and uninterested in doing the basic oversight work that is incumbent upon them, giving the amounts of money they're taking from us and spending on these government operations. So there's a lot of work to be done. And the left is also very angry at another Supreme Court decision in which the conservative majority, all 6 conservative justices in this case, Roberts it was Roberts and everyone else, so it was 6-3, overruled the Biden EPA's effort to essentially take over our nation's economy under this Clean Power Plan, or whatever the technical term was for it. Now, what had happened was Obama first came up with the scheme. The Republicans were put in control of Congress in the middle of his second, I think in 2010. He couldn't get anywhere with Congress, so he said, well, I'm just going to have the EPA take over the economy by transmorgifying a law that was very narrowly written to give the EPA broad authority to essentially outlaw fossil fuels in our country. In summary, the left was upset that the Supreme Court ruled that if the EPA is going to take over the entire economy, Congress has to pass a law giving them that power, and that the president can't interpret a law that had nothing to do with that to provide this unbridled authority to the EPA to essentially move all of our energy creation from being based on oil and gas and coal to whatever fanciful energy plans they had in terms of the green energy world. Basically a massive restructuring of the economy. And the court found in areas of major questions where you've got the significant political and economic impact by these regulatory agencies, there's got to be black letter law, very specific, authorizing that by Congress. Now, they're all angry about that. And it tells you something, that the left continues to be angry at being told they have to go through the systems of self-government in order to pass laws. You saw that with the abortion cases, where they were angry. The Supreme Court said, oh, we're not allowed to come in here and tell the states on how to protect life one way or another vis-a-vis abortion. We were wrong to do that, to take away the people's right to govern themselves on this very sensitive topic. And in the case of Biden, this is the third time they told the Biden administration, you can't take very narrowly constructed and written laws and turn them into some lever to do things that aren't envisioned by the law. And when you do that, you're acting as a despot. And and what I liked about, and I'm of two minds about the Supreme Court this time of year, because obviously, given the nature of our work, Judicial Watch, we're always very interested in what the Supreme Court is doing. But I think the Supreme Court has an outsized role in our nation's constitutional system that's beyond what the founders envisioned. And you know, we're almost always waiting for what the Supreme Court says. Well, you know, the Supreme Court is just one branch of our government. But in this case, the Supreme Court is performing a public service and a service to our constitutional system by reminding us and reinvigorating the notion behind the creation of our constitutional republic of the separation of powers. And I talked a little bit about this before, but I'll go over it again. Separation of powers is not a term an academic term that you learned about in civics class that you can forget about. It's something that we need to hold dear if we want to preserve our freedoms. And the idea of separation of powers is that these powers that the government has are just awesome in terms of having great ability to do damage and harm the people's liberty. And so in a well-run government, you try to diffuse that power among, as the founders called it, the departments of government, so that no one agent of government has special power or special abilities to mess with people without running into other government officials with countervailing interests. It's a check on our government on behalf of our liberty. And I encourage you to read James Madison's Federalist number 51, because he talks about this. And I'm going to quote it a little bit here. And I think it's, you know, on Independence Day, I think we should talk about the founders a little bit more. And it's a lengthy piece, so I'm only going to quote a little bit of it. But the great security against a gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department, and by the several powers meaning the executive, legislative, and judiciary, consists in giving to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachments of the others. The provision for defense must in this, as in all other cases, be made commensurate to the danger of attack. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The interests of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices shall be necessary or should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections of human nature, on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself. A dependence on the people is no doubt the primary control on the government, but experience has taught mankind the necessity of auxiliary precautions. And of course, those precautions are the separation of powers in the Constitution. And what I loved about Madison's insight here is he's talking about these the importance of separating the powers among the judiciary and the legislative branch and the executive branch, but he highlights the involvement of human nature in that. His point is you're going to have congressmen who don't want anyone messing with them. You're going to have presidents who say, who have a personal interest in being powerful presidents. You're going to have judges who are going to be jealous of their authorities under the Constitution. And he thinks that, and he says that's that human nature with a great Republican structure of a separation of powers that will do best to separate the liberty. It's just such a brilliant insight. And of course, this is what the court is trying to do with this EPA case. It's whether or not, if you can't get Congress to do what you want to do, does a president get to act as a despot? Does he get to act as a dictator? Does he get his agencies to say, yeah, well, In order to do this, typically we would need permission from the American people through their congressional representatives, but they're not going to give it to us, so we're going to do it anyway. And we'll see the system work. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do it that way. Now, sometimes Congress is willing to let the president do that. And it doesn't mean that Congress has the ability to allow the president to be a despot either, in terms of giving him unbridled power that's explicit to destroy our liberties. So there are all these balances and checks in place. Now, the left doesn't want to talk about this. They want to talk about the planet being on fire. They want to try to destroy the Western economies through their green energy socialism, and the Constitution and the structures of a Republican form of government, our constitutional Republican form of government, are to be cast aside whenever it gets in the way. So this is the danger we're facing. We have this court, thankfully, elevating our constitutional system, and the radical left becoming crazed in opposing it. And as I said, it's a revolutionary period. But the good news is, dear friends and patriots, is that because of these decisions, America is more free this Independence Day than it was last Independence Day. And I encourage you I just read from James Madison's Federalist papers. I encourage you to learn more about the Founding Fathers. Pick a book, read it. What I love about the reach that Judicial Watch has is that I know there are so many smart people, great Americans, who know so much more than I do about issues of our day and certainly of our history. What are some good books out there that your fellow Americans should be reading about the founding? Put them below. Share the wealth, and so we increase the understanding of the generation that founded this country, and so that we're able to keep the freedoms and liberties they sacrificed so much, not only to give us, but also the generations that followed. They also sacrificed so much to give us this legacy. And the more we know about the legacy, the better. Now, one thing I've been doing over recent years on July 4th to celebrate the holiday is to read our Declaration of Independence. Again, it's one of these documents you hear about, but you rarely hear read, except obviously this time of year. And even then, it's not even read. And it's designed to be heard in many ways, and you'll see that when I read it. So as I said, this is a great Independence Day. I am joyful this Independence Day because I know, for instance, there are unborn human beings who are alive today who might otherwise not have been but for the removal of this anti-constitutionalist Roe abortion regime. I know Americans have more freedom today because of Second Amendment rulings. I know we have better self-government or more self-government today because of other rulings constraining the deep state's despotism. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.